Newcastle United are the League Cup champions. They've finally won a major trophy all those years after the last one in 1969. But how do Newcastle United and Eddie Howe kick on from here, Jim Campbell? Because you win a trophy, you want to win more.
Absolutely. They've got a taste of the biscuit now, haven't they? And you can see what it means to them. It's been an amazing thing. They want more of it. They're in a position to get more of it. That's the nature of what happens when a club goes through a big takeover. I mean, it's really obvious to say, isn't it? But the first point is keeping hold of Alexander Isak, because that is a player. You look at him and you think, there's not a club on earth he wouldn't get in the team for. He could play for Real Madrid. He'll be one of those players, absolutely. He already is one of those players. And there's been a lot of talk about, might they have to sell some of the family jewels? You put Bruno Guimaraes and probably Anthony Gordon maybe in that bracket as well. And I suppose the key thing to keeping them is using this to kick on and to qualify for the Champions League. Now, I think actually the international break comes at a really good time for them because they can have the party. They can kind of get used to the idea that they're champions and that there probably won't be a Premier League hangover.
Some of them can have the party because Dan Burn did say that he'll be reporting for England duty at 8 a.m. the next day after the cup final.
So Dan Burn's specific party will be delayed,
yes.
which may be a problem later, but I think we'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that one. It sort of compartmentalises the season in a way, doesn't it? There are 9 games to be the best you can, and then finish in the top 5. That's assuming it will be 5 Champions League places. I think City are unpredictable. Chelsea look vulnerable. I think they're really, really well placed to do that. That has to be the short-term aim.
Jim, I'd like to go back to Alexander Isak, but before we do subscribe to the channel and like the video for more content like this. Isak is one of the best centre-forwards in world football.
Yeah.
And strikers are at a premium nowadays, as we know. Your beloved Arsenal know that perhaps more than any other side. And with Isak, I think there was a thinking that if Newcastle maybe kind of drifted and didn't qualify for European football, or didn't win a trophy, whatever, didn't have the season that clearly they are having now, is that somebody might pinch him, like Arsenal or someone. It would take a huge bid to try and prize him away. Whereas now with Newcastle, why would you leave?
Yeah.
There's such a great feeling around the place. As I say, that's the first trophy you would think of a few coming their way, and that's the idea. But if they can get into the Champions League, so how they sustain this, Champions League football is crucial. I don't think that a Europa League would be a disaster necessarily, because they could, the more chance of winning that for crying out loud. But if they were to kick on and get that Champions League place, then that would be absolutely huge. So then the summer transfer window it's an enormous opportunity for Newcastle now to cement that.
Yeah, and I think actually when you look at the quality of them at their best, and that was on display in every area of the pitch in the cup final on Sunday, the top end of their kind of ceiling of quality is really, really high. We've seen that. We've seen them essentially just toy with a very good Liverpool team, despite obviously Liverpool having a difficult week with what's happening in the Champions League and stuff. They've toyed with them essentially on a massive stage. Really impressive. I think it's about raising the floor rather than the ceiling, because that midfield, that trio of Tonali, Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes is great. With no disrespect to Sean Longstaff and some of the other players in there, Joe Willock like that, they're good players, but there is a drop off there, isn't there? And I think it's really important that they kind of get a few more reliable kind of high-level performers in there to rotate throughout, because if they do have European football, we've seen it time and time again, teams struggle with the difference that makes to your schedule. It's not just the extra games, it's the intensity of those games. We've seen Villa struggle with it a bit this season.
You don't want to just be making up the numbers in the Champions League as well, because when they were in the Champions League, of course, they hammered PSG, they got some good results. They ultimately went out in the first round. That's not what you want. You want to be thinking, you see what Villa have done this season. Newcastle could definitely do that.
You know what?
Year.
I think they're in a really good spot to be able to capitalise on that because of the mentality of Eddie Howe, I'm sure we'll come on to. So quite a lot was made by Newcastle before the game about how they learned from the Carabao Cup defeat they had to Man United a couple of seasons ago. Like mentioned staying slightly too close to Wembley in the hotel they stayed in and a few other things about their preparation. And they learned from it, and they just excelled the second time around. They've had a season in the Champions League where it didn't quite go out how they expected to. They were there a little bit ahead of schedule. There's probably a good argument there. They're maybe a better team now, certainly a more experienced team. They're certainly
they're a better side,
a side who kind of would expect to be there rather than a side who surprisingly achieved it.
Yeah.
And you think, actually, Howe seems quite good at learning from these things. He's very good at improving players as well, which I think Howe is a really good long-term planner and a long-term builder. And I think that season of, experiencing the Champions League and all the extra kind of difficulty that brings is something that they are well prepared for.
And it'll be interesting that you talk about the players, you can sign players and so on. Eddie Howe, who means so much to that football club, and him and we can't forget old Mad Dog Tyndall as well.
And why would you want to?
Certainly not. There's such a connection with the fans. And I think that's a really important thing going forward as well, because you can have this warm, lovely feeling. You get that initial success that they've had, and everyone just they can't believe it.
Yeah.
It's just euphoria in Newcastle right now, as it should be. Going ahead, how do you then, as we start talking about, start cementing yourself as a Champions League side, start to have an eye on other trophies? You've got to build, but to keep that feeling as well.
Well, it's a sad truth about modern football, isn't it? But if you're trying to sort of break your way into those top echelons of it, you kind of have to build a brand.
Yeah.
Because actually, part of the reason that Newcastle can't spend the money they have available is because their revenue streams don't allow them to, because of the kind of PSR situation. They're not big enough. So actually, building on that brand is there's a lot of potential there, because you might look at that as a neutral from another country and go, wow, this city is mad. All the scarves and all the colour and the kind of vibrancy and the intensity of the support was so passionate. You can see all the people in the crowd. Ant and Dec are clearly significant, and all that stuff makes a difference, doesn't it? When people are going, I kind of like this tribe, that's what you're trying to do.
Yep.
And I think they're in a good spot like that. I mean,
it's attractive.
One club cities are a really, really interesting thing, and they tend to be kind of like Napoli's a great example, where like you think of that as being a bit crazy and a bit like full on in a good way, and Newcastle have an opportunity to use that to their advantage for sure. So this is a great advert for that.
It's about strengthening your squad when you are, as a football club, in a position of strength.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot going on there, and much has been said about the ownership of Newcastle United. And of course, perhaps a conversation for another day, but
Well, but part of that is that they have no jeopardy. Like,
yes.
regardless of that other conversation, there's very little jeopardy for Newcastle, which is something they need to use to their advantage as well.
Indeed, but we know that that they're trying to improve the training facilities. For example, there's talk of the stadium. Can they upgrade the stadium or new stadium? Again, that's a conversation that they're having, and we hear the reports from it. But I think this summer transfer window is huge for Newcastle United, because it's where's the statement of intent? They've got a decent spine to that side. They've got some extras as well. The squad isn't as deep as, say, the likes of Aston Villa. I can even throw Chelsea in the mix there as well, actually, even though Chelsea would love a number 9 like Alexander Isak, but as you said, everyone else in the world would as well. So where can they do that? Also, one or two players, the lovable Dan Burn, the beautiful Fabian Schär. These guys are in their early 30s now. And when you start thinking about the demands of the footballing calendar, when you do qualify for European competition, the type of football Eddie Howe likes to play, it's intense, it's up and at 'em, it's all that good blood, guts and thunder kind of stuff. You do need reinforcements. And I think that they do need to start looking and see where they can do that. But the summer is big for them.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right about the age profile as well. It might actually be one of those things where some of these really popular figures start to play a lot less. But in that regard, that raises the floor in its own kind of way, doesn't it? And it's about Eddie Howe, I suppose, being able to keep those players happy. Yeah. But he's exceptionally good at improving players. Jacob Murphy's a great example of that. We haven't really spoken about Jacob Murphy much. Like, probably the most likeable man in the Premier League.
One of them, yeah, definitely.
And what time he's having, and what season he's having. Like, he was a player that I don't think many people would have thought would stick around and thrive under Howe, but he has done that. And yeah, absolutely, they need to augment the squad, but I suppose it is about integrating these new players in a way that
they buy into what's going on.
Yeah. See, very much. You've got to identify the right sort of characters.
Joe Linton, Bruno Guimaraes, and Sandro Tonali. Look at those three guys.
Yeah,
they're not from anywhere near Newcastle.
Yeah.
Yet how much?
Joe Linton wasn't even a midfielder when they signed him.
Just those three now form one of the most fearsome midfields in the Premier League. They totally get it. The love that they have for the fans and the whole thing going up there, and the love the fans have for them is off the scale.
And it comes back to what you were saying about the city. and how it has a really, really strong identity. It's very, very easy. There's a lot of handles to grab if you're not from there to sort of, to get involved and kind of, make yourself loved. And actually, one of the things I find really interesting about Newcastle as well, in a sort of tactical sense, you've touched on it already with how intense they are. We see so many kind of very kind of tactically intricate attempts at essentially replicating Pep Guardiola throughout football, and we see it a lot in the Premier League. Newcastle don't do anything like that, and they are kind of very traditional in a lot of senses. Obviously they
in an English sense,
in an English sense, very much. There's a lot of very, very technical players there, and that's not to say that they don't have the same ability that these other teams do, because they clearly do. But it is very, very refreshing, and there is a sense, isn't there, that this kind of style is growing a bit stale, and that it's maybe we've had
in
long
the wider context of football.
In the wider context of football,
yeah.
Because essentially it's been around for such a long time now. There are ways to kind of fight against it and ways to overcome it. And could it be the case that Eddie Howe, with a kind of air quotes traditional style, might find himself in vogue just because he's been given long enough at Newcastle to thrive and build his squad and kind of put his principles in place?
Quite possibly, Jim. And who knows, it could lead to more trophies for Newcastle United.